Going to share with you today on the art of resuscitation of reciting your work. I mean, once the work is completed, it's written down, and as an artist, we look for an opportunity and ways to actually share our work. And some folks sometimes are a little bit intimidated and don't know how to. So today, the art of recitation is a beat-lit workshop. Beat-lit is the workshop that I actually hold in Hartford, Connecticut. Beat for heartbeat, literature, lit for literature. And we actually take the time to walk through some components. So today, it's going to be real quick. It's really going to be as interactive as possible. I know we got some people live on Facebook too, so I'm looking forward to interacting with you. But I want to actually talk about a certain literary skills, right? That I've coined tap the mic. And today we're going to take a look at audience, right? Purpose, timing, tone, and intuition and intonation, right? And so when we write our piece and now we want to share our piece, there's a certain musicality to poetry, right? And so in essence, I'm going to poems and then break down the skills and so forth. But as I read and as you begin to read your work, think of music, think of poetry like music, right? Poetry is music, music is poetry, and we all have our favorite lines when it comes to a song or so forth. And so if you take that and apply it to your poems, right? So that when you have a favorite line, you automatically you gravitate towards that line, right? And then you can build off that line to the next line and so on and so forth. But we'll get there in a moment. So one of the first things that I like to do is I like to share a few poems from the manuscript that I am finishing up, entitled Sinking in Moonlight Alone. And as I read through these poems, right, listen for the intonation, right, the tone and the musicality. And as I'm queuing up, I had it queued up and now it's somewhere. I need to find it. Give me 1 second, please. When you're on Facebook and there we go. Now I'll bring my Zoom back. So this poem is titled Puerto Rican Rose, and it is actually an elegy, which is an homage to those who have passed away. So elegies are poems to folks who have passed away. So this is titled Puerto Rican Rose for Rosa. The Rose City Breakers would always sweat you during the battles against the Wizards. Mid-session beneath the disco lit floor. B-boys steady nut clutching while up rocking, jocking your Puerto Rican wild style. Your big name belt buckle flaunted your fly girl, Rosa, sporting a fresh pair of hot pink skates laced in bad bitch blue. Skin tight Lees tattooed your hips. Flash dance cut off unveiled a cinnamon cool complexion. Salt and pepper haircut cropped to the side, rocking bamboo earrings, at least 2 pair. Your Tayano took no shit, quick to tell a cabron to step or get bum rushed up against the lockers. Your ferocity flickered like the flame too rickety to light a wick of courage. My b-boy never exhibited dope break dancing moves. My moonwalk made Armstrong deny history. My windmill a scant breeze, centipede kinked like an inchworm. Head spins led to exemptions from recess. At your repass, I recalled how my inner little b-boy used to gaze across the disco lit floor, late session, caught in a crush groove as you flickered your bamboos in unison, hitting every note to, I wonder if I take you home. I wonder if you were ready to go. If the cinnamon soft petals of your rose roller skate round a sunlit floor. If the b-boys behind the pearly gates sweat your gait. If God favors hot pink over bad bitch blue. Yeah. In that poem, if you follow the intonation, right? And so when you are reciting your poems, it's a wavelength. So and you ride that vibe. And so for yourself, only you know yourself and know your own biorhythm, right? And so to expect you or me to recite a poem the same way that I do or that you do, um, it may not be the case. And so one of the most important things is in the intonation, in the inflection, right? As you ride that poem like a wave, like a vibe, and so forth. I'm going to also tone, right? So tone is the attitude and mood of your poem, right? And so when you write your poem and you have your poem, you can decide to deliver it in different tones. And depending on what tone that you actually select, it could be a tone of humor or sarcasm. That's also going to affect your intonation and how you actually deliver the poem. So one of the first things you want to really think about is what's the tone or the mood or the attitude I want to set with this piece. Um, and the tone I wanted to set with Puerto Rican Rose was, homage, as the speaker is reflecting years back when he was a young kid roller skating, having a crush on an older girl that everybody had a crush on, and how that tone of homage, just to be grateful at that particular time in her life and our lives, roller skating, to be in the same place at the same time, and also when you when we reflect on people who passed away, we reflect on the stories and the narratives. And so that tone was a tone of homage. I want to move to, I want to make sure I don't have any questions in the chat. Okay, we're good. And if you have questions, please throw them in the chat. You can follow me on Freedom Douglas on IG, Facebook, Frederick Douglass Knows the Second. I want to move into this next poem. And it would be interesting if folks out there, if you in the chat can put what you perceive the tone of this poem to actually be. This poem is actually an ode and an homage to the opioid crisis, which has affected a lot of us, a lot of loved ones, a lot of people in our lives. And so we lost my nephew last year, not 2 years ago, excuse me, to the opioid epidemic and so forth. And it became a huge national, crisis and so forth. And we started holding pharmaceutical companies responsible. And so in one particular case, there's a former pharmaceutical CEO by the name of John Kapoor, and him and six other executives were brought up on charges. And there's a metaphor to this poem. It's titled Unicorn Shall Come Down, Isaiah 34. And I'm just going to read it. So tone and intonation in this poem, and then also timing. Like, so how, what's the pace of your poem, right? Are you trying to, we get nervous every once in a while. Um, so we try to go through things really fast and get my phone, I'm so nervous. Um, or sometimes we may long and draw a poem out or our delivery out and so forth. So pacing and timing is also a component that you want to think about. So as I read this poem, consider, tone and timing and purpose, actually. Okay. The unicorns shall come down with them. Isaiah 34. To John Kapoor and the six other executives, Michael Gurry, Richard Simon, Joseph Rowan, Alec Berkaloff, Michael Babbitt, and Sunrise Lee of Insys Therapeutics. When I spotted my nephew that final night, the flicker of his sable eyes sauntering behind the window of that pearl white Lexus, tiptoeing through the parking lot of our suburban crisis, I apperceived, hours before that morning call, the cog in my sister's voice, how his wife recited her lines as he laid silent beneath his death photo, a sable-eyed Marine uniformed in blue dress, white covered cap, American flag safeguarding his six. how she displaced the bent spoon, lukewarm like virgin milk weeping from the sea pot of poppies. Your habitation of dragons compiled $2 for every dollar spent on the panacea of fentanyl. A payola of scripts pimped by physicians, suckling a sunrise lee of breasts shaken off the pole into the laps of their office. For the Lord hath a sacrifice, the blood of 400,000 lambs slaughtered like the fat of the kidneys of rams, like my nephew who sunk into an orphic of addiction, tragic like the Shakespearean version of Christian doctrine commissioned by King James, an inpatient of war. His tours of duty inside the VA refastened his faith till his breastplate became too audacious. His helmet sought sanctuary. His shield took a knee. His sword split stone till your white horse tethered his veins to a chariot of thorns, driven by shareholders, thrashing into a great depression. Their sanity derailed by an unbending sky. And the unicorns shall come down with them. And you, the satyr, shall cry to his fellow how your half-man bestial behavior wasn't solely to profit from the mythos of a healing horn dipped in the soul waters of the wounded. And in this poem, some context, of course, the title itself, the unicorn shall come down with them, Isaiah 34, is directly aligned from that particular chapter, scripture, I should say. And then another line that's directly from there, the fat of the kidneys of rams, and a couple others. And so when you gravitate towards a certain literary device, like in this particular case, metaphor, right? That's also going to actually help you to convey the poem, right? So in this particular case, there was tone. See if anybody hopped in the chat. Nobody, okay. In this particular case, the tone and the pacing. So the musicality in pacing, right? And so there's syllables, right? Inflection, there's syllables, there's stressed syllables and unstressed syllables, right? And then an unstressed syllable is a quick pop, like it, you know? And then a stressed syllable, takes a longer time to let it roll off the tongue, right? Like measured, right? And so that's a stressed syllable. So when it comes to the musicality of your poem, right, select those particular lines or words or phrases that you want to actually practice your pace. So you may want to slow down, or you may want to pick it up a little bit, depending on the intensity of the poem, where the intensity lies within the poem itself, where the suspense lies, and also the potential conflict. And so in this particular poem, like I look at a line, like my nephew who sunk into an orphic of addiction, tragic like the Shakespearean version of Christian doctrine. So there's the musicality right there in that particular line. So I'm using alliteration, which is when you use a consonant multiple times. So you got S's playing in this particular line. You also have internal rhyme scheme, internal rhymes. So like my nephew, listen to the S's, right? And how I use the S's with my inflection, which attributes to my intonation, right? So like my nephew who sunk into an orphic of addiction, tragic like the Shakespearean version of Christian doctrine commissioned by King James. And so these are some of the tidbits that I use with my delivery, with my resuscitation, and so forth. And if I commit to memory, I mean that's fine. Some poems I have committed to memory, and many I don't. And so resuscitation doesn't mean that you have to memorize your poem. Not at all. I mean, you can definitely read your poem, but there's the difference between reading, all right, and delivery, right? So some of the elements that I'm sharing with you are to help you to work on that delivery, which in return is going to help develop your resuscitation. What time is it there? Okay, a little bit more time. So I'm going to read another poem. Just checking the chat for any questions. Okay, cool. I'm going to read another poem. In the last poem, the unicorn shall come down with them. That was looking at, of course, tone, timing, and intonation, but also purpose. Like, so what was my purpose of writing that poem? Losing my nephew to, fentanyl overdose and so forth, learning how tragic, how large this pandemic is, epidemic is in the country, the opioid crisis, right? And so, why did I want to write that poem? What was my purpose? I originally wrote the first version of that for his funeral. And so then I sat down and I looked at it and I asked myself, well, what am I saying, in this particular poem, and what do I want to say, like truly? And so it really went to the core of, well, I really want to address this opioid epidemic and how we don't really notice something until it actually literally hits home. Um, so with this last poem, Sinking in Moonlight Alone, right? This is the titled piece from the manuscript that will be done momentarily. And I got a couple more minutes left, so I want to share this one. And then hopefully if anybody has something they'd like to say. Still looking for it. I had it queued and now it's gone, so excuse me 1 second. There we go. Trying to hide from me. So the premise of this poem, real quick, is that my father had passed away when I was 6 months old. I'll be 47 next week, so 47 years ago. And my mom, she looks at me and she always sees my dad, and we go out to eat and so forth. And every time she always represents how I look like my dad. So this is Sinking in Moonlight Alone. She searches the day my father died, digs in the ancient like an archaeologist, uncovers a quiet eternal in her Pepsi, no ice. A virgin moon sips her soft dawn, swirls her straw into a first kiss that fizzles into footprints fossilized on the dance floor from 1955. My father's two-step is as measured as an officer's condolence, slow twisting our screen door. She swivels her straw, exhumes his lithic heart, camel walking into the desert 6 months before my first step. Our waiter inscribes with a paternal hand. His attributes remind her of mine. My attributes remind her of Harvey, a soul as cool as an errant ocean sinking in moonlight alone. She softens the amber in my heirloom eyes, discovers the color ether tucking her sun beneath the sediments of 1974 before she sips her soda. Yeah, and so in this poem, again, it's the purpose, the tone, the intonation. It's also an element because I'm sitting, right, but I use my body as my body language, movement, and so forth. So also you can use your body as an instrument, right? If the poem is music, right, or the musicality of the poem, right, you can use your body as that instrument. And so you probably noticed, like, I've been constantly, as I've been talking and reciting, I've been constantly moving. That's how I actually push some syllables out. Sometimes we get words stuck in our tongue and be like and, and we fumble them out, you know, I actually use my body to actually, push those syllables out. Sometimes, some of the syllables want to just come out in a mesh. And so the pacing, taking the deep breaths, taking the time to actually listen to ourselves, right? As a writer, a poet, or a reciter, take the time to listen to your own voice, uh, become comfortable with their own voice, right? And I think, but as growing up, I wasn't too comfortable with my own voice, which is kind of ironic. But I've learned to love my voice and love myself, and so these things also help to convey the content of the poem. If I was to read that poem and I was like, "She searches a day, my father died, digs in the ancient," like a um, the content loses its originality and its intent. And so with the purpose, tone, timing, intonation, um, body language, inflection, these are ways and elements that can help when reciting a poem. A couple of comments I want to say, thank you for everybody in the comments and so forth. And this has been a long journey, so this wasn't overnight for me. I've been writing now for the past 20 20 years. And so, when I first started, I was mumbling and rushing through poems and so forth, but learning to let each syllable has a responsibility. Like, you've crafted and put that syllable on the page for a reason, for a purpose, right? And so let each syllable breathe to the best of its ability. It might stand on its own, right? It might do a duo, a tango with a couple of the syllables, right? Or it can be a cacophony of syllables, but each one, stressed or unstressed, you ride it like a wave. And I think that's about out of time, if I'm not mistaken. Don't want to take other folks' time. If there's anybody who wants to, jump in, ask a question, which form is your best form? Oh wow. My best form of poetry. I don't think I really have a best one, but um, I do love sonnets, um, villanelles. I really challenge myself to practice a new form. So the sonnet Sunday school in the '90s actually, you know what? If I got like 3 minutes left, if I don't, let me know. Sunday school in the '90s, the way I understood it, is a sonnet that won the Nutmeg Poetry Contest. And when you take a form, actually, I can't find it right now, so maybe I won't read it. Oh, there it is. When you take a form, it does challenge you. So a sonnet is 16 lines. Each line has the same meter, and a meter is a syllable and an unstressed syllable, right? So there's different meters, and so a sonnet has um, a meter to it, right? Each line 16 syllabic count. So I'm gonna read this one real quick, and I think this will be the last one to rock and roll out with. I appreciate you guys taking the time to hang out with me. Thank you, Lit Fest, for this as well. So this is a sonnet based off of Noah's Ark, and just real quick, we know the dove story about Noah's Ark, but the Noah sent the raven out first, and then the raven didn't come back. So he sent the dove out a couple of times until we get the narrative. So this poem is, what if the raven went out and saw that the world was going to be the way it was and didn't want to bring the message back? So Sunday school in the '90s, the way I understood it, for Elder Rucker, a sonnet for Elder Rucker, one of my former pastors, with hip hop references into it. And then let me slow down a little bit, because now my pacing and timing are like I'm trying to rush right now, right? A white bird was sent to see if the ocean had pulled back from the sand, but not before the raven had knew. Mount Arafat sunk into a deep blue. She soared beyond the world is yours, with salt and pepper wings to life anew. Pearl tight clams planted steady like ready rock in the palm of a fiend's hand. Cahokia pyramids ruined like Southside projects in barren lands. Children of African pitched into the sea, seen from an ancestral view. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, on Sunday too. Boxed in, the Raven couldn't portray or obey such a game-changing plan. So Noah bequeathed and then unleashed his cussed Diamato among doves, who got knocked out for 7 days, awoke dazed, then bit the ear off a twig. The king of the ark donned his mark to redeem the earth, as the lesson says. Or was the water beneath heaven fated to French kiss the crown above? That white bird snitched. So Raven olive stitched his gizzard by a chiseled fig. And Noah cursed that black bird, like Nina Simone psalming tears for the dead. So that is form of a sonnet, right? And a sonnet has an element, there's a twist in the sonnet as well. And so I just learned to play with forms. So sonnet, villanelle, so on and so forth. And so that poem was just a metaphor of how the narrative of, white is good and black is bad. We look at a raven and we say the raven is, is cursed and so forth, but we don't know that the raven was the first one being sent out by Noah. And so this is what poetry, does for me, resuscitation. I know I'm definitely out of time now. I really want to thank everybody who has tuned in and so forth for this recording. Remember, so resuscitation, think about purpose, tone, timing, inflection, and meter. Thank you.